Hello, and welcome back to the Tea and a Buddy podcast. I'm Dominic.
And I'm Erica.
And today we're going to be talking about the Mews Houses. You've been to the Mews.
The Mews.
The Mews.
The Muses.
The Muses. M-E-W.
Yeah.
In case you're unfamiliar what we're talking about, not M-U-S-E. Or
Yeah.
The Muses of people.
It would just be a single mew.
No, it's like M-E-W-S. Muse.
Yeah.
It basically
That's
means...
not plural?
No.
No?
It's just... There's no...
You wouldn't say, I live in a mew.
I live in a mew. I live in a muse.
Muse?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, you'd say I live in a muse.
So if you were talking about
In
more than
in
one...
the muse. You'd say the muse, because it's kind of like...
Yeah, we're gonna have to back it up, because...
Back it up!
I have a feeling some people listening are like, what in the world are they
What are they talking? What are you talking? What are you talking about here? No,
Mews, like, the sound that
what,
cats
do you know,
make.
like a little, it's making a mew.
It's mewing.
It's mewing. My cat is mewing. No, it's, muse, it comes from, like, a French kind of word to, like, mean malt.
What? That doesn't make any more sense.
Yes, it does. Because, it basically means stables.
Okay.
Yeah.
Molt, though, like
a
what
hawk.
birds do.
Like a hawk, yeah.
Like when shedding feathers.
Yeah, because it'd be like falconry and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's like an old word, like...
Okay. What is a muse? What are the... Is it... Yeah, I don't know. Is it
like
a
hawk
muse or the muse? Or what are muse?
The muse.
What are the muse?
They are basically... They were originally kind of like in London anyway, which is what we're going to be talking about, the London Mews. Originally
I feel
built...
like we have not started this episode off in a clear way. People are just sitting there and they are confused beyond belief.
These are little backstreet properties that are cute.
There we go. Ding, ding, ding.
They were originally built in the 18th century to serve as stables with accommodation above for the servants. Like the wealthy people would come into London, and, you'd have, like, Lancaster Gate area, which would be like a royal crescent or an they'd be, like, big townhouses for,
Right.
Lord and Lady Lancaster, yeah.
5-story townhouses.
5-story, 6-story townhouses, they were grand. Mm-hmm. And of course they had to have all their servants and they had to have all their horses come with them. Because
the beautiful white, like, row houses that you see in London.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Behind them, usually, is where, like, say, like, you've got Lancaster Gate right by Hyde Park, because, they look out over Hyde Park. It's like, oh, yeah, it's the park.
Okay, so, like...
Oh, how delightful.
It would be, like, what is essentially to us, to most of us, the alleyway, behind, right? I mean,
yes.
Really, that's what it is. It's like the alleyway behind these row houses. Okay.
Of course, like, when they had their big, grand country houses, they had stables for their horses, and, the servants would live downstairs.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Like in Downton Abbey.
Like in Downton Abbey, there'd be a lot of space.
Yeah.
But in London, you're sharing space with, like, a few million other people.
Yeah. And,
there's not too much space for the horses to go and the servants, because, you essentially downsized.
Okay, so these mews were created in the time
they were created in the 18th...
cars.
Yes.
When horses were the cars.
Horses were the cars, yes.
And so were there...
Carriages.
Was there space for carriage and the carriages also? Okay. Yeah.
It's like they were, they were popular... They were like a popular and nostalgic reminder of London's traditional history, basically. Okay, yeah. And, throughout...
Traditional wealthy history, anyway.
Traditional wealthy history. And I mean, even now, we'll get to that later, but... Because
the
those
poorer people, they certainly didn't have mews behind their
Oh, absolutely,
their
no. Throughout the 18th and 19th century, squares, crescents, and grand terraces of townhouses were built for wealthy families to reside in exclusive areas such as Mayfair, Kensington, Marylebone, and Hyde Park.
Okay.
So, you see one of them, you go, oh, that looks like a great house, Lancaster Gate, Mayfair, whatever.
Yeah.
It looks really gorgeous and all that. If you just kind of go on the street behind it, there's going to be a Mews there.
Yeah.
And it'll have like a cute little entrance and it'll look all like, oh, it's like a little tiny little row. And then you go in there and there's like little tiny houses. But they're like 5 stories.
So if you're still like unsure about what we're talking, if you've seen Bridget Jones, right?
Bridget Jones.
She basically lived in a Mews, right?
Yes, and that guy in McMafia.
McMafia?
Do you remember that show with James Norton?
Oh, yeah.
He lived in a Mews house.
Yeah.
A few other people. I mean, actors, and I think Madonna and Guy Ritchie lived in one for a while.
But I'm thinking of, like, a film that people will have seen, that where they can visualize.
Love Actually, where
Keira Knightley.
Keira Knightley's character with her husband, they lived in one.
I mean, it looks
when
like
he comes to do his like thing with the thing, he's in a Mews that looks like it's like a tiny house and it's like cobbled streets, for the horses.
So when you're walking down the street in London, it literally looks like an alley, because that essentially, like, back in the day, it wouldn't have been paved, right? It would have been
it looks exactly as it. No, it would have been cobblestone.
But I think even like just dirt back there.
It would have looked like horses would have been around there.
Yes, yeah.
But it would have.
I didn't realize
it wouldn't have been cleaned up like it is today.
Because I mean, I had no idea, obviously, what Mews were before before I met Dominic, or before the first time I went to Britain.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of such a thing. I had seen Bridget Jones' Diary and Love Actually and stuff, and it just didn't really register. It kind of looks like a weird little street. When you see it, it obviously doesn't look like, other streets in London.
Yeah, it looks all cobbled and charming.
It looks like a tiny little street, which is what it is. But when you're walking down the street in London, like, there will be these big, like,
grandiose, like, townhouses either side.
Almost on like an avenue, quite a
like
wide
a terrace,
street.
Yeah.
And then if you keep walking past, there's just this little tiny street that feels to Americans anyway, like an alley. Like, if you didn't look down it, you would think, oh, well, that's where they put their trash. That's where their dumpsters are. You know what I mean? And then upon further investigation, if you were to turn down there, it's like the cutest, most magical little freaking place. And I would much rather live on one of those Mews than on the big avenue.
And they've painted them nice and everything like that.
They're so cute and quiet.
They're very quiet. That's the kind of like thing. I guess they had to like build them like that, to stop. I mean, back then. No, I mean, traffic wasn't a thing. It was just other horses.
They're not open to through traffic, are they? They're usually...
Usually they're kind of like stopped off.
Like a dead end.
Like a dead end, yeah. As upper-class families moved to these areas, they needed space for maids, servants, and as well as storage for horses and carriages. For all their intents and purposes, Mews were the service roads.
Okay, yeah.
Alleys, behind the homes of Victorian and Edwardian elite.
And it feels that way.
And most of them had stables and a coach house on the ground floor. And then the first floor having like a hay loft and a couple of rooms where the staff could live.
Okay.
So it was like, it was tiny.
When we were in Britain and you were explaining to me, because I think we saw one, we haven't
something Mews or whatever like that, and you were like, oh, what's that? Mews. I was like, oh, it's just the Mews. That's why they're quite. I mean, nowadays, they're very, like, affluent. They're kind of, like, very expensive little homes in the city.
Because they're much more private and quiet.
They're much privater than... Yeah, they're so private.
But when you were explaining what they were, I didn't realize that they were, like, living quarters at the time, even. I thought it was just, like, essentially, like, a garage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was for your carriage and your horses, and that was it. I didn't realize... I mean, it makes complete sense.
I think Bathurst Mews, which is, I think, the largest of the mews in London, they still have some that stable horses, you know.
Oh, really?
Some of them still have, like, you know, we use them to stable horses and, you know, but, you know, there's still living quarters where you can drive your car in now, you know, and some of them even have, like, a stacking system so you can have two cars. One goes on and it kind of lifts up.
Oh, jeez.
And the other goes underneath it, and, you know, you've got two cars in that little tiny garage, you know.
I mean, it makes sense that it would have living quarters. Probably, I guess, the people who took care of the horses were the ones that lived above the stables.
Yeah, the servants, whatever, the ones who were, like, grooming and stuff. And you notice when you walk down them, they're kind of dipped in the middle, and there was, like, a drain running all the way through.
Oh, I don't remember now.
That's for, like, you know, when the horses peed and pooped.
Oh, God.
They could easily just
oh, my God, it must have smelled awful back in the day.
Awful. It just smelled like horse.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, and dirty and stuff like that, and it was kept behind. It was like
I wonder
the
what
back
they would,
alley. You know?
I wonder what, like, the wealthy people back then who lived in the front part would think of the fact that people want to live in these now, that they're quite desirable.
That they're just as expensive as the front part now.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because, you know, they have them now.
Can you imagine? Like, what would they think? What would they think if they knew?
Like, oh, terrible. How could you live there?
Oh, what a scam.
What a scam, yes. Because, I mean, when it started, you know, like in the 20th century, when Britain started becoming more equitable in, like, you know, equal society.
Right, yeah.
And with the 2 world wars and stuff like that, you know, devastating the capital, you know, they were kind of run down.
Well, yeah.
And they were kind of forgotten about. And, of course, the aristocratic families, you know, owning these places, they didn't have the money to upkeep them anymore.
Yeah.
They had to rush back to their country estate and just kind of like live in that house, and, you know, while it was falling down. They couldn't afford a London pad, you know.
Yeah.
It was like those days were gone, so they were just falling into disrepair. And, you know, like Mews homes were either sold off to businesses such as taxi firms or garages.
Oh, yeah.
So mechanics and stuff owned them for a while.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. They were abandoned altogether and started falling apart.
That's what I was just about to say. Like, I can't imagine, like, how they became the cute little, like, they almost look like little cottages in the city.
Yes, they look really tiny little cottages. Like when you know, and you can paint them like pink, and they look cute with all the cobbles there. And
I mean, and we've seen like they set the little bistro sets out front and everything because although I guess people do pull cars down there, right? Like they have garages.
They can pull cars down there. Yeah.
But it makes you wonder how it became that, because you would think that even later on, when people did drive cars and everything, the people who live around the front of those mews, you would think that they would still want that property in the back, like, for a garage, and maybe rent out. Like, in my head, the modern equivalent of the mews, you know, when they had the carriages and the stables, and then the people who took care of those things lived above it, would be to keep that space as a garage for their cars. And then to just, like, rent out the top part as an apartment, which maybe some people do.
I mean, I'm sure people probably bought them up. I mean,
separately from the townhomes?
Oh, yeah, they're all kind of separate now. Yeah. They pretty much always were. I don't think there was any kind of, like, they weren't, like, connected physically, I don't think, to the actual front.
Oh, really?
I think there was kind of, like, some space between them. And the ones that weren't, they had their, like, adjoining thing boarded up, and, you know, they sold them off as 2 separate homes.
Yeah.
Because by the 1950s, the 40s and the 50s, they became kind of associated with, like, gangland and backstreet poor scruffy culture, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it was shady and, you know, because the places were falling down.
You would go into the Mews for your shady dealings.
Shady dealings, yeah. You go around the back of them for the shady dealings because, you know, it's just like, oh, yeah, this is where I'm going to meet, you know.
There's garages.
It's like working people and, you know, the mob bosses and all that,
that's interesting.
It's like a gangland culture. That's where they'd sit and count their money from robbing people or whatever, you know. But then in the 1960s, kind of like with the canals, like we talked about on a previous podcast, like in the 1920s, they were a big booming culture, you know. They were quick ways to get stuff, and then they just kind of fell out of favour by the 1940s and 50s once cars became the thing. They saw a revival because a lot of people started to realise, oh, these buildings can be transformed into a legitimate home, and also there's space for a car, and it's like you can't really park in central London.
Yeah.
And so, oh yeah, you know, all these people were like, oh, this is great, and they've got great aristocratic history, and oh, Lord so Snooty owned the building out front, so, you know, I've got his Mews house here, you know, and I bought his Mews house. And people like British Formula One drivers, who were like big at the time, bought a couple because, oh, we can store our cars in the garage here in London. And then, you know, they started becoming fashionable with like the West End artists and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like...
I think Michael Caine owned one in the 60s.
You remember when we were in London and we went to... We were looking for the Scotch, I think?
That was in St. James's Yard or something. Or it was a yard. It wasn't really a Mews. Because
it was sort of a similar kind of thing.
It was a similar kind of thing, though. It was just kind of like... They were kind of hidden,
right?
You know, enclosed by the, you know, and you had to go through this like little alley
and gallery, and
all that. That was kind of like the Scotch and all that. That was kind of like the yard where they hide all the horses because, you know, you couldn't see the horses until we had them trotting out with the, you know, the important people in the carriage.
That makes so much sense, though.
Bring the carriage round, and we'll go around the park. You know?
Bring it round. Yeah, that's
bring
what
the
they
carriage
would say.
round. You know,
that's what they would say.
And it would literally come round round the back.
Yeah, that makes it more sense why... Maybe even where that comes from. I mean, we would need, like, you know, the actual history of why you guys...
Bring the car round. They say bring the car round.
Yeah.
In London.
Yeah.
It's like, bring the car round, you know. And it's like, the car is like, maybe, you know... parked at the back somewhere.
I'm trying to think, do we say that in America? I don't know. Bring the car around. I don't think so.
Bring the car around so I can get in and go, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. But that makes sense. I bet anything that's where that comes from, isn't it? Because it always sounds like, oh, bring it around. Like, what? You know?
Bring it around from where?
It just sounds like, it just sounds like one of those weird British things.
But bring the carriage around, you know? Bring the carriage around from the Mews.
From around the corner.
Yeah.
Literally around the corner.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is it makes sense looking at the Scotch that we went to. Dominic and I are, if you're just tuning in and you've never listened to any of our podcasts before and you have no idea who we are, we're big Beatles fans. We like 1960s swinging London culture.
Stuff. Yeah.
So one time when we were in London, we were looking for some of these popular spots like from the 60s that all the 60s rockers and artists and everything hung out. And we found the Scotch of St. James, which was a club. It was a big club in the 60s. A big nightclub in the 60s.
It was kind of like the Bag of Nails, but the Bag of Nails was on an actual street, I think.
I think so.
The Scotch was kind of like this tucked away upstairs nightclub.
And right there also was the Indica Gallery.
The Indica Gallery was there,
where John Lennon met Yoko Ono famously.
Yeah. I think...
but that sort of like little tucked away kind of thing, when you're telling me now that the Mews regained like popularity or regained like public consciousness in the 60s, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because it was very like that, like, oh, I could see it being like hip
it
and
was
trendy,
hip and trendy
know?
to own a tiny little house.
Because it's kind of tucked
well,
away.
It's tucked away. It looks charming, you know, a little bit of paint.
Yeah.
A little bit of potted plants and cobbled streets, and, you know, you can bring your car around there, you know. You can bring your little Austin Princess.
Yeah.
Or, you know, your Aston
Mini.
Martin or your MG, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, yeah, I'm cool. I live in London. I just go out this gate and I'm in the city, baby.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm an art. You can picture,
and it's a very bohemian, I live in this kind of, like, tiny little
yes.
loft. There's a hayloft. And I've got my studio where the horses
yes.
used to be.
It seems very artsy, bohemian, like, yeah.
Little spiral staircase or whatever, you know, was trendy in those days. You know? Yeah. I mean, so in the 60s, there was that Mews Houses revolution. And the average price of them rose from nearly nothing. You could buy them, like, for cheap.
Can you imagine?
And nowadays, they're going for, like, £11 million.
Oh, no!
Because, you know, it's like everybody wants to own one, you know, because, you know, they're the most popular in areas like Westminster, Bayswater, Kensington, Chelsea, Mayfair, Notting Hill, Knightsbridge. Oh, that's it. Just off Portobello Road, there's one. And I think it featured a lot in, like, The Italian Job.
Oh.
I think Michael Caine owned one around that area.
Well, like we just said, the people with cars, like
Madonna and Guy Ritchie, you know, they owned one.
Let's
apparently.
have one because it comes with a garage, essentially. You know, like.
And Bathurst Mews, you know, that's kind of like one of the, you know, it's like one of the hugest one, you know, because it's right off the Hyde Park estate, or it's on the Hyde Park estate.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, it's sitting right in the heart of W2, as they call it, you know. And it's set back from the hustle and bustle of Bayswater Road. And it's like, you know, I'm sure they've kind of like refurbished a lot of them, you know, they've added on. Well, so they've made it almost like the big townhouse out front.
Yeah.
They've made the Mews House almost as grander than that,
well,
you know.
What I'm imagining is they knock through to the ones next door.
And make a big
rather
one.
than go up. Because we haven't... I don't know how many Mews there are in London, but...
Oh, there's a lot of them.
But I think you and I only saw like
if
maybe
it's,
one
if
or two.
It's basically, that's what it's called, like Lancaster Mews or Upper Norfolk Park Mews. If you see that, like,
it'll
street
be like
name,
whatever the
that'll
street,
be...
It'll be like whatever the big
Lancaster,
street
yeah, Lancaster
is.
Gate, it'll be Lancaster Mews.
Yeah,
you know, or
yeah.
something Mews, you know, or Great Norwood Park Mews or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And once you see that, once you hear of someone living in something, you know what they live in. They live in that little tiny place, you know.
Yeah.
And it looks all cute.
I seem to think we were watching something on the BBC one time or something. One of those, like, mystery kind of, like, whodunit type things. Am I just completely making this up? I don't know. It seems like somebody was being chased.
Oh,
and then they saw some Mews, and they were like, "Oh, thank God, because there's doors I can bang on."
Yeah.
Like, fairly close.
Yeah,
and, like,
I do remember that
I'm
now,
protected in here because
you know, you're running along a street, and it's just like just a big wall and everything like that, and then you see like a little Mews gate or tiny little passage down there. It's just like, oh yeah, there's houses down there.
Yeah.
People live there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's usually like a cul-de-sac, you could call it, but it's just kind of like a cobbled, kind of like, it's very charming. I mean, I can imagine, like, you know, like tourists going down there going, oh, this is cute, you know.
Well, because they look like little English cottages, you know. Like,
in the heart of London, yeah.
It looks like a little tiny neighborhood. Like, I don't know, it's just so different from anything else you're looking at in London. It's like, London is like a city. Like, if you've ever been to New York City or any other city anywhere, it's like that. It's just a city, you know. And so those kind of, like, cozy neighborhood streets don't exist in cities usually, you know, except they do in these Mews. Like, it's just no traffic. It's just a tiny little thing. Your neighbors are directly across the way, you know. You don't have to, like, look left or look right or whatever to cross. It's just like, it's just right there.
And it's quiet as well. That's what people always say. Oh, it's very quiet. Because I have a feeling
they've got their little trees, their little
they've got protection
plants.
of like the big out front houses, and there's also like usually a wall.
Yeah.
That, like, you know...
I wonder how safe they are, though.
I mean, what do you mean safe?
Well, because a lot of the houses, a lot of the townhomes in London, right, they have at least, like, stairs to go up, you know, to the front door to get into the house. Like, there's not... I don't know. I say there's not. There obviously are. Doors and windows right at street level.
I mean, can you imagine if a homeowners association existed in Britain?
Yeah.
The first place they'd started snapping up would be Mews streets, you know?
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, you can't come in here with anything bigger than a small, car.
Yeah.
Well, and you can't. I mean, you see people drive their vans down there, but you could never get, like, a huge lorry or truck down there,
Because you couldn't turn around. You'd have to back out.
You'd have to back out, yeah.
Yeah. It's really just one way. I can't remember where we saw it, but I mentioned before people put out their little bistro sets and stuff.
Yeah, because some of them
in at night, or like if a car is coming, like
some of them have like little like restaurants and stuff and cafes set up.
Do they?
Yeah, I think so. Some people have like turned the Mews house into a business.
Yeah,
it's like a little coffee shop or whatever, and
I mean, I had no idea
because most of the stuff, like most of the buildings, out front are like grade 2 listed. A grade 1 listed or whatever.
Yeah, they're all old, aren't they?
They're from the 18th century because they were built for Lord Snooty and his pals, and whatever.
Yeah.
I say that, it's like, it was the wealthy and elite, and then, like big industrial businessmen bought them,
Mm-hmm.
But usually it would be Lord Snooty and his pals who had them originally.
Yeah.
In the very beginning.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's quiet cobble street, tranquil country-inspired living.
Yeah.
They really make it, and they do. They look really charming when you go down them. So
they have like little street lamps and everything.
Oh, and at night, yeah, they look great at night because they have to have like little like.
I mean, if we lived in London, that is where I would want to live.
Yeah, I think if we lived in London, people are like, oh yeah, get a big nice townhome or whatever. If we had the money, if we had the like. Mega billions. I'd buy a Mews. I'd buy a Mews home.
I think so too.
Because it's just kind of like, they're charming. There's 3 stories. You can get a car in there. You can get a little tiny car because that's all you need in London is a little tiny car.
Yeah.
Like a little Fiat or a little Mini. And you can just drive the Mini in and out and just be like,
oh I didn't realize. I mean, you and I watched a couple of videos like on YouTube or something of touring Mews homes. I didn't realize that they were as big as they are even. I would have thought...
I think they've expanded in some of interiorly,
I would have thought just the ground floor, the first floor, we say in America.
The first floor, and then there'd be like a second floor, and that would have been it in those days, They would have added on top, kind of like they do here, they built up.
Yeah.
Rather, or we'll just add another couple of floors on to put some bedrooms and like a bathroom and stuff. Because those places back in the day wouldn't have had a bathroom. They would have been an outhouse somewhere.
Well, yeah.
Or they would have been going where the horses went,
The only thing that I could think might be a complaint in a Mews would be light.
Yeah, no, when you see...
Because they are like
we watched a couple on YouTube. A couple of tours on YouTube of like inside the houses because it's like they're going back so there's no like it's backing onto a big house.
Yeah.
So there's going to be
they're not as
so
tall
the light
as
has got to come from directly above. Yeah. So the skylights are your friend.
Yeah.
They install them and they paint them white so that
everything's white usually. Yeah.
And so they go in this one they had like a skylight that opened up on and became like a terrace when they put it down. It was like glass.
Yeah.
It was like tempered glass or whatever, like 3 thick or whatever.
Yeah.
So light would get down, natural light would get down, so...
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It looked great. It looked like, oh yeah, they've made this work, The light's just coming down from there,
Yeah.
You don't have to waste on
I definitely encourage you guys to, Google.
Yeah, Google and check them out, and if you're going to London, then, find them.
Yeah.
Because, it's, there's a lot of them, especially around the Bayswater area.
And I don't know, though, can you, just walk down them? Or are they kind of, no trespassing,
I'm not sure. I mean, they only own the house. They don't own the street. Yeah. Unless, they're mega billions and they've decided, oh, yeah, this is I've bought up all the houses here, so I essentially own the street. Which I don't think has ever happened.
Because there's not, sidewalks, I don't think, are there?
No, you just go down, you usually find them, they're usually, a tiny little alley, and you'll see the sign that says, Bathurst Mews, or Lancaster Mews, or whatever, and you'll go down it for, a tiny bit, and then it'll open up onto the Mews, and it'll just be, a small, narrow, cobbled street, usually. The good ones, anyway.
Yeah. And I think some of them are wider than
Some
others.
of them are wider, yeah. I when they've, knocked down bigger, houses around him.
Yeah.
And put up, gaudy 1960s flats that were, government, that looked like they were, government apartments for, civil servants or something.
Oh, yeah.
And so, they've kept the name, this is a Mews, so they've, widened the street a little bit. So it just looks like any old street. Those are kind of, they're more modern than the other ones,
They're never, through, though. Aren't they always, a dead end?
Usually they are, yeah, usually. But some of them can be...
All the way through.
All the way through, yeah. But, yeah. I mean, you can have, stuff, you can make it it's... because there's a lot of people who go, oh, I wouldn't like a small house like that, and have to go up the stairs, and for that amount of money, I could own 400 acres in South Carolina, or whatever,
Yeah.
I've got my house in South Carolina that I paid $12,000 for, and it's got 70 bedrooms or whatever,
Yeah.
And it's and you're paying $15 million for that tiny little squat place in a smoky city.
Yeah. I mean, they do that with... Anytime I see someone giving
Studio
a tour
apartment in New York City.
Yes.
I'm paying $1 million a week in rent. It's I paid $1 million
a week.
It's well, actually, you can rent that Mews that we looked around, that we saw on YouTube. You can rent that for £8,000 a week.
Oh, yeah.
So it's that, it's going to add up after a while, But, people who I'm paying, 500...
Well, they like to compare the size that you could get in Podunk, Nebraska,
I could have a sprawling acreage, and it's nobody wants to live there, though.
It's just well, I mean, people
want to live in New York City.
It's some people might want to live there, but that person who's giving you the tour around their apartment doesn't want to live there. They're willing to pay that because that is where they want to live, not where you live. You know what I mean? If they wanted to live where you live, they would live there. They would live where you live. It's just everybody's different, live wherever you want to live. And if you wouldn't spend the amount of money to live in a, in a shoebox in New York City like this other person, then don't.
It's go to New Jersey and buy a huge, swath of land instead of living in, next to Park Avenue.
Yes.
Paying the same price for a tiny little place.
Yes, it's the same thing, Oh my gosh, everybody's going to have an opinion on everything.
Oh, yes.
Where were you getting this information, just in case anybody
residentialland.com. They're selling. I think that they're a property.
Oh, well, there you go. So if you're in the market for a Mews house in London.
go look for it, yeah. residentialland.com. They've got it, so yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely, next time... Oh, the other thing I wanted to ask you... Oh! It's just a London thing, isn't it?
Actually, there's Washington Mews in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought, you know, like, New York
I don't remember that, like, as if I've ever been down every single street in New York
I think
City.
they're more prevalent in London, but I think
I actually meant around Britain, but that's interesting to know they exist in New York City.
Yeah, I think London would have been, like, the townhomes of, like, you know...
Yeah.
There might be some up in, like, Manchester or, you know...
Because they mostly exist...
Because of rich people.
Yeah, around the townhomes, like, because the people who live in the country, when they come to the city...
They needed all their stuff.
They needed their,
Or they needed, you know, their horses and their carts and stuff so they could go around. It's like, oh, we're not taking the tube.
Yeah.
Now that we're in London. It's like we want all our creature comforts that we had in... Sudbury Manor in Oxfordshire.
Did the tube exist when people were riding around in carriages?
The tube has always existed. Cavemen built the tube. Tunneling with little hammers, you know. No, the tube is probably the oldest one in the world, actually. Oldest subway.
Next time we go to London, though, I do want to walk around, and if we can go down some of these mews, without getting in trouble, you know, I don't want to trespass.
Well, no,
and, like,
I mean, I if someone goes, "Oh, get out of my mews," it's just like, you don't own this place. Yeah. It's like there's several of them.
But it might be like a situation of like,
you're
like an apartment complex. You know what I mean? Like, this is only for residents. Like, if
it has like residents only on the sign. Yeah, fine,
that's what I mean. Like,
but I think most of them are open to go down.
If we can just have a little wander around, I'd like to explore some more of them because
funnily enough, that watched walker, or those people who walk around London, you know, with like the GoPros on their heads, just walking.
Yeah,
they walk around. They walk into those places, so you know, and they don't live there, obviously. Yeah. So it's just, you know.
If you guys haven't ever seen this YouTube channel that Dominic just gave a free plug to, you should check it out because it is a fun... He doesn't really talk,
He doesn't talk at all. No, well, I don't know. You know, there's a lot of them, though. You know?
There's a lot of them. But one that we like is called The Watched Walker, and he literally just walks around London. Yeah.
He just walks around, and you've probably seen him if you've...
He just walks around.
Just walking.
He just films it. It's nice to hear, like, the ambient kind of
noise,
it's
kind of like ASMR and stuff, or AMSR.
Yeah, it's sort of a thing like that. Anyway, I think we've rambled on long enough.
Yes.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you guys so much, as always, for tuning in. We really appreciate our patrons, as always. If you do not follow us on social media, why not? Give us a follow. We are at TButty, TEABUTTY on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all the things. And we'll talk to you next time.
Talk to you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.